don't care. Like, up to you.
We're live, part
Oh,
2.
okay, cool. So welcome back, all this crowd. We haven't spoken a second ago.
Best crowd ever.
Yeah, for sure. So, so basically, moving on from the Romans, we get then after the year 70 and the destruction of the Second Temple, we get to the year around 130. There are two opinions. One is the year 130, 136. It doesn't matter as much, but Adrian builds changes Jerusalem's name to Aelia Capitolina. The reason why there are two opinions is because Bar Kokhba revolt was in between those two dates, and one accord is that because he changed the name of Jerusalem, the revolt started, and the other one is, in the aftermath of the revolt, to punish the people, he renamed Jerusalem. What we do know is that between the destruction of the Second Temple to the time it's called the Aelia Capitolina, the new name of Jerusalem, Jerusalem mainly was, especially like part of the old city, definitely the Temple Mount were all completely desolate. Aelia is Adrian's like family name. Capitolina is for the three Roman gods. And so that's where the name comes from. You're trying to turn it into a pagan city. Fast forwarding, and by the way, this is where pretty much for the next 500 years, around that time, the next 500 years, there's really close to none. Like, there's really no historical evidence for Jews living in Jerusalem. We assume that there are a little bit here and there, but the presence of Jews was never fewer than at that time. Things became almost even worse around the year 324, 325, with the conversion of the Roman Empire to Christianity. And basically, again, going back to Jerusalem, Helena, Constantine's mother, basically decided to, she came to the Holy Land and she found different holy sites. It's an ongoing thing where new religions that emerge find holy sites. It usually comes also down to politics. It's not just simply they excavate like today and say, oh wow, this is where this happened. In fact, usually it's not where it happened, but there are always other reasons behind it. So so she basically spots where Jesus supposedly was crucified, where the sepulchre is today. So just a little fun fact about that is that sorry, I got distracted. So
something about
basically
Jesus where he got sacrificed?
No, where he was crucified. Okay, so this happened in the year 325. Now, just let's go on a side note for a minute. We're gonna go to a side note in a second. No, we'll do it right now. The sepulchre is on where today, you know where the Cardo is in the Jewish quarter? You know where there's a Cardo as you go down the stairs in Jerusalem in the old city? No,
cargo?
we don't.
Yeah.
The Cardo. It's where
it's like that underground little mall thing.
Oh,
right.
Okay, yeah. The underground thing?
And right. But you have also part of it exposed next to the stairs where you go down.
Right.
If you go down to the
with the column.
right, and that's right, exactly, and that's exposed. So Cardo every ancient Roman city used to be um, divided to four. It was there. It was there was one major road that was from south to north, and another major road from east to west that divided the city to four. By the way, that's a little bit of till today how we kind of have a little bit of the four quarters in the old city. Not exactly, because obviously it goes beyond it, but the idea is that really every Roman city was split that way, and where the Cardo, the main road, which is that Cardo, was once like where the market was, and everyone was always hustling and bustling there. And it comes from the word Cardo in Latin. It means a hinge. Okay, it means that's where the word cardiologist comes from. It's like a in Hebrew we call it tzir, meaning like a road. And the interesting thing, it also means a hinge of a door, because why a hinge of it? That's where the word cardinal comes from in the Catholic Church, because cardinal is is on the one hand, he's like a hinge of a door, right? Just like a door turns around, because the cardinal has two jobs. One, that he's in charge, he's a bishop of his domain, his area, wherever he's dwelling. And the other one, he's supposed to be an advisor to the Pope. Never mind that. These are all phonetics. The point is that if you take the Cardo today and you go in a straight line from where the underground market is, and you get to the Christian quarter, on that road is pretty much the church, the sepulchre, where Jesus is believed to be crucified. Now, why did they have the church right there? Why did they decide that that's where Jesus was crucified? Because going back now 200 years, when Adrian made it a pagan city, he made a temple there for the goddess of Aphrodite, and and it had a dome. That was the temple for Aphrodite, and it was on the main road because it was supposed to be like the major temple. And then so Christianity, because they knew that we want to get the pagans into liking Christianity, we want them to kind of be part of it, so we're gonna in a way tempt them, or kind of make it more more of a feeling of continuity, where we're going to take somewhere where they worshipped idols in the past, and we are going to transform it. We're in a way keeping the holiness of that place, but we're basically now saying to people, you're connected to this place, not because of pagans, because Aphrodite, but you're doing it because this is where Jesus was crucified. And this is where synchronizing with religions and paganism that I mentioned earlier, this is a great example, because that church used to be a pagan temple. Why is this important? Keep that in mind. We'll get back to that in a couple minutes, where it has to do with Al-Aqsa Mosque. So we continue on. By the way, in the year 361, there was a Roman ruler who was called Julian the Heretic. He was called the Heretic because although the empire was already Christian, he wanted to go back to paganism, and he actually wanted to build the temple, the third temple for the Jewish people, because he was all about temples to whatever god there is. And then later on, if we're jumping just for a second, we get to the year 614. By the way, by this time, Jerusalem has already been for centuries under Byzantine rule. The Greek Orthodox Church, as I already mentioned, Jews were not allowed in. There were sometimes the Jews were allowed in. The famous example is on Tisha B'Av, was the only day the Jews were allowed in to see the Temple Mount, to kind of show them why they lost, why God forsake Jews and prefers Christianity, chose Christianity. So that was like the purpose of the Jews. Also, by the way, is part of the um, theology of the Greek Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, led by Augustine. The theology of Jews needing to keep on, they need to keep being alive because they are the they're the reason, they're living proof that Jesus is the Messiah and that God forsaked the Jewish people and preferred Christianity. And then we get to the year 614. Now, the first century, the first part of the 7th century was extremely tumultuous. In fact, to some extent, some people would even say it was like a world war. Imagine this: you're Jewish, you're persecuted for already centuries from Christians, and then in the year 614, the Persians come from the north and they take over Israel and Jerusalem. And there is a bloodbath against Christians. In fact, in Herod's Pool today, that is close to, that's very dark there. It's between Mamilla until for Ben Yehuda, right? There's the whole dark area there. People go there. They have, I don't know, they go to smoke there.
The park?
Yeah, that the dark park. So
Yeah.
south of the park, I'm not talking about where you have all the grass and it's all made, but there's a huge pool there, right? It's called the Herodin Pool. It's from the Herodin times, but one of the things that in Jewish history was more omitted was that when the Persians took over Jerusalem in the year 614, Jews took Christians there, and basically there was a whole bloodbath, and I think Jews killed like about 10 to 15,000 Christians. Not that I'm crying for them, but that was just for persecution that the Jews were under, and that's why the Jews were helping the Persians. But then, only 14 years later, Christians, the Byzantine Empire, took over Jerusalem again, and that's where there were there was also mass executions and persecutions, not only against the Persians but obviously against the Jewish people as vengeance. And then only 10 years later, or really 8 years later, but in 10 years later, 8 years later was the Muslims basically got to Israel, and eventually 10 years later, Jerusalem was conquered. My whole point is that in the first part of the 7th century, for those 40 years, Jerusalem was under basically 3 different empires, actually 4, because it alternated, and that just took a huge toll on life. That's when the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, for instance, that book is attributed to the 7th century. Again, very strong messianic yearning, because people really thought the world is coming to an end. Imagine today, you have 4 different empires running over Jerusalem within such a short period of time, and so many casualties, etc. Now, when we get to the Muslims, we obviously have Omar, the Caliph Omar, who conquers Jerusalem. But later on, and this is where it becomes really interesting, is really with Islam in the picture now. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is called Al-Aqsa because of the words in the Quran, Al-Aqsa, which means the mosque farthest away, right? So it doesn't really mention the name of Jerusalem in the Quran, which is almost like the '1 rule in Israel advocacy. When you speak about Jerusalem, people always like to mention that. So it's an interpretation that came later on. In fact, even some Muslims, and these are Muslims in the minority, don't think that Al-Aqsa was in Jerusalem, actually, that it was something more heavenly. But leave it as it may. With the years passing by, okay, um, uh, if Jerusalem was conquered at 638, and the first time Al-Aqsa is really mentioned in the Quran was supposedly when the story there is Muhammad's night voyage. That's what it's called, when he goes on his flying donkey, a burak, and he gets to, again, what later on came as an interpretation, to Jerusalem. And he ties El Burak to one of the stones in next to the Temple Mount, and he ascends to heaven, and he gets the Quran from God. So and then he comes back. Now, by the way, according to certain myths that were created later on, one of the ideas of why Al-Aqsa is on the Temple Mount is because of someone Jewish who converted to Islam, and he said that he remembered seeing Muhammad that night coming and tying his donkey to one of the tying it and going up to the heaven. It's kind of interesting that if you had a flying donkey, you really have to tie him. But keep that aside. Think about it. Anyway, keeping that on the side. So Al-Aqsa was pretty much put on the top because of a few reasons. The first one is really because of the Umayyan dynasty that came after. They had issues. You see, Mecca is the most holiest place to the Islam, and they had issues because Mecca and Al-Medina, who are holier than Jerusalem, were in a way taken. They were local rebellions there, and they didn't have a grasp on that. They weren't able to really keep their power there because their headquarters was in Damascus. So it was much easier for them to be in charge of Jerusalem and making it holier to Muslim people in order for people to go and to ascend to Yerushalayim and to like have a holy voyage as opposed to Mecca. So there was a big political motive behind it. Then just one fun fact about the Dome of the Rock. By the way, Al-Aqsa is the black dome, so to speak. Looks like black silverish, but today really Al-Aqsa, Muslims, people usually, especially in the speaking about the Israeli-Arab conflict, they use the entire Temple Mount. Usually it's synonymous with Al-Aqsa. It's really technically the southern mosque, and
that's where everyone prays. Nobody actually uses the Dome of the Rock.
Right, exactly.
For high holidays, they do, no?
No, we're talking about Muslims.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking about the Muslims. Don't they go there for, what's it called? In Ramadan?
Well, they will really go to Mecca, but if they go even on Fridays, or they go to Jerusalem, or some people want to just go there because it's like a holy site for them, I think what Jake was also trying to say is that and Muslims around the world, they bow down south. Well, if they're in Jerusalem, because they're facing Mecca. Now, which again is a very fun fact that people like reminding Arabs when, again, in the Israeli-Arab conflict, you guys are not even bowing towards Jerusalem. Clearly, your connection is not as strong as our connection. The interesting thing is that in the Quran, just because Jake mentioned that, it mentions how Muhammad actually in the beginning did bow towards Jerusalem, but he changed it later. There are a few reasons why. One reason is because he was laughed at. He constantly, Muhammad tried bringing the Jewish people towards him to kind of, if you want to get them to convert to Islam, he was very deeply influenced by Jewish people. Before, in a way, Islam came to the world, before he brought it, so to speak, or he had a revelation, and he wanted Jews to come. The minute Jews kind of looked the other way, they didn't want to convert, that's when he, in a way, understood that he needs to find a new avenue to kind of like have his own uniqueness for his religion and to set apart from Jews. The same story, just like with Christianity, that in the beginning Saturday, right, was the Shabbat, but then it moved to Sunday because the Jews wouldn't budge. It's the same thing that happened with Islam. Shabbat, also they started on Saturday with Muhammad, but they saw that it didn't work. The Jews, it was already taken, and Sunday was taken, so they took Friday.
But why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't it be nice if everyone was the same day?
I don't think they thought that way.
I mean,
because
like,
because if you did the same thing as them, then you're them.
Not better, right? You're not better than them. You're not really giving something new here. So why do you exist? Why do you say God chose you if you're not giving a new message? Another, it doesn't really matter. Something with Muhammad, he also then later on claimed this is already Islam apologeticness of, Muhammad originally didn't bow towards Mecca because there was idolatry there. The minute there wasn't, then he did. The point is that Mecca is more holy to Islam, to Muslims, than Jerusalem. It's third place for Sunnite,